Here's the story of a group named Coding Blocks. And we're doing our second community talk. Subscribe to us. Give us a like. Be sure to check out www.codingblocks.net where you can find more developer talk.
Hey, contest alert. If you fill out the SurveyMonkey form below, not only will you get a 9-month trial for RAD Studio, but you'll also be entered into a contest to win one of 4 packages that include an Embarcadero t-shirt and a $100 gift card. So scroll down a little bit and fill that form out before you forget.
So you're already hearing a lot of voices, so let's put some names to these faces. I'll start us off. I'm Michael Outlaw.
I'm Zack.
I'm Alan Underwood.
I'm James Studdart.
Anyway, I want to hear, I know about Alan Outlaw, but starting with James, you want to tell us a little bit more about you on the way?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm the host of the Cynical Developer podcast, and I'm a .NET consultant and contract developer.
And I'm Ted Roberts. I am typically a C# web developer, but I also do native Android and iOS development.
I'm Zack Briggs. I typically do regular application development for cross-platform like Linux and Mac OS, Windows. I've worked in PHP, C#, obviously Delphi, and most of my mobile development has been Delphi at this point.
I'm Sean Martz. I'm a software consultant in Cleveland, mostly Microsoft Stack, some Python, and a lot of Angular in Cleveland as well. I would consider myself a remarkably stupid developer.
Oh, please.
And so with that, let's just jump into it. Today's video is on RAD Studio, which is a programming tool to help make cross-platform applications. So Zack and Ted, do you guys want to talk about cross-platform and what that is?
So I'm going to start off. I normally do native development. So when I'm developing a new mobile app, I get to develop an iOS app, get it all ready for market. And then when I'm all done and it's ready to go, I get to turn around and redo the whole thing in Android. With cross-platform development, what you should be able to do in a perfect world is build the app once, deploy to Android, turn around, and redeploy to iOS as if it with one single code base.
So one code base instead of 2?
Yes. One code base to maintain, one code base to work on, and one iteration path.
Awesome.
So what RAD Studio is, it was brought up to speed by a company called Embarcadero. Embarcadero is actually owned by another company called Idera. Idera owns Sencha and actually quite a few other things. They're quickly becoming a pretty significant player in the programming space. The RAD Studio itself has 2 different languages you can use. One of them being your typical C++, C Builder, platform, and then Delphi. Now, Delphi, a lot of people have heard of Delphi, or they think of it as a kind of a legacy thing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Delphi is actually a very well developed, time-tested platform for development. I'm going to speak more so about the actual Delphi side of things, as I don't really mess around a whole lot with the C++ side, unless I'm working with like IoT devices or other things that require more of a hardware level set of skills. So
That's my dad's language, right? Delphi?
Well, we'll touch more on this later, but Delphi was actually developed with a common lineage to a lot of the other languages out there, and we'll kind of touch on that as we go along here. So with that, you guys want to get in the meat and potatoes and see the platform?
Yeah, let's do
Absolutely.
All right. Okay. Everybody able to see okay?
Yeah,
it. Definitely can.
All right, so this is the core IDE development. When you fire up RAD Studio, this is typically what you get, whether it's C++ or whether it's Delphi. your common stuff, it looks very familiar because a lot of the platforms, a lot of IDEs you've used all have the same kind of setup. You have your tool palettes and your structures. You have typically your object inspector, and I've got project manager here. It's probably hidden a little bit. So you got your project manager, and you have your tool palette and stuff. Let's go ahead and when you go to create a project, you have a choice here. You can choose between developing a VCL application, which is more of your native Windows style application, or a multi-device application. Multi-device is what you're all kind of here for. So that's going to be your cross-platform stuff.
Hey, so real quick, what does VCL stand for? Is it Windows only, or is that cross-platform for like Mac and Windows?
No, that is Windows only. It's a visual component library.
Okay, gotcha. All right, cool.
And that does go back a long, long ways. Borland, the original developer at Delphi, created another product called Kylix, which was designed to take your Delphi project and take it over to Linux. You used CLX libraries for that, which were cross-platform, which basically was a VCL for cross-platform, effectively. Okay. During the time period, it was really kind of ahead of its time in some ways, and it really didn't take hold because people you couldn't natively load VCL applications into it and then recompile them. So it really put an end to the product before it really got out there. So you have your typical options for launching a new application. You have a blank application or a header footer style. You have your master and detail, tabbed app, and you have a 3D application. Delphi is capable of doing 3D, so is the C++ side of things. In fact, I don't think there's anything that Delphi can do that the C++ side couldn't do. So you can still use CBuilder if you want. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a blank application here just to kind of get people familiar. One of the things that I've always liked about RAD Studio or Delphi over the years, I can actually separate my form designer here and have it up at the same time as my code. So I can be looking through all my components, and I can, be writing my code as I go and very easily do that. Another cornerstone to RAD Studio is that I have these views right here. I don't have to redesign my application when I go to different platforms. If I want to run this thing on, say, like an iPad, I can sit here and I can switch it to iPad mode. I can pop it into landscape. I can see what my stuff's going to look like on the iPad. And the most important thing is I can make adjustments. So if I don't like how it looks, or let's say I want to take one panel full of components, and instead of it being linear, I want to make it side by side, I can do that and have this view handle that.
Now, this is a bit of a misnaming because just because you're doing this as an iPad view, you still have to go into the code and define the criteria that's going to show each one of the views, correct?
No, it's automatic.
No.
At least to my knowledge, it's automatic. I've never had to do anything additional to it. It's got several different platforms it can support. Your 7-inch Android tablet. Most of the time, most apps I develop, I don't use the individual views unless the client has something specific. So, all right, I'm gonna.
Is that using emulation like some of the other cross-platform editors?
What do you mean?
Well, when you get iPad up or you get Android up, is it using an iPad emulator or an Android emulator, or is it just doing like a responsive design?
More like a responsive design. I would probably say that's probably the direction that goes.
You don't. So this is more closer to if you're doing native development, because he can launch this if he wanted to. If he's going to launch this, he can launch it on any one of the emulators. He can also plug one of the phones directly into the computer and launch against the phone and watch it and develop against the phone as well.
Okay, so I guess another question before we get rolling too far here is, along those lines, typically developing for iOS, you have to be on a Mac. Are you running on a Mac right now, or are you on Windows?
No, I'm on Windows. You do still need the Mac for the PA server.
Okay.
You unfortunately don't shed that, but
Can you define PA server?
PA server is a little program that runs on the Mac that communicates back and forth to Zack's Windows machine. So he will tell his Windows machine to build for iOS. The Windows machine communicates over to the Mac, asking for build Xcode. It goes through and builds the application, and then returns back the built package.
Oh, so you can still do all your main dev on like Windows box, just have like a Mac Mini or something to do.
Yeah, that's literally what we have. We have a Mac Mini sitting on a standing desk in the common area.
Yep.
Okay. Nice.
So I'm just going to really quick roll through the components. I mean, most developers have seen a lot of this before, but you have your standard components like your buttons, and you have your panels that you can use. This is all really common stuff that everybody uses throughout the course of development, no matter what platform they're on. You're familiar with these mainly because the standards that got put in place by Windows in relationship to developing, and they kind of just carried that over for mobile application development. The cool thing about this, though, is you have access to a lot of other components that you can use. If I want to throw a calendar on the page, I can throw a calendar on the page, and it's all just drag and drop. There's no, you can switch to a linear flow, but there's no need to do that. And, you can align things. Like I can pop this window up over here, and I can throw this thing at the top of the screen if I want. And so, that's the panel that I just created. But the other things that it gives you access to that are really, really nice is if I come down here, for instance, I can directly access the Bluetooth support on the mobile device. And if your workstation, if a Windows platform has Bluetooth, it'll access that Bluetooth too. It doesn't care. The beacon support is related to iBeacons, so you have the ability to do that. You can access the notification center. It's got dialogues built in, and again, all this stuff you don't have to redesign between platforms. So
like on that notification center, that'd be a good one because each one, like the iOS notification center, is going to be different than the Android notification center. So it's one implementation or usage of it, but it's going to translate that into the native environment.
Yes, and that is actually something that we should probably touch on here. One of the foundations that Embarcadero has gone for with RAD Studio is it compiles things natively. So you don't have this re-encoding, or it's not hitched to another set of libraries in a way that slows it down. One of the things that used to be true of Xamarin, and I've kind of been informed otherwise at this point, is if you compiled something in Xamarin for another platform, it required .NET with it. And from my understanding, that's not true.
So if you're building for iOS, it's using Mono for the actual build, and Mono is actually building it down to a native iOS platform. If you're compiling for Android, it's using Mono to do a just-in-time compilation, which Apple just doesn't allow on their system. So when they went to Apple, they had to do that as native.
Interesting. So another quick question along the lines here, because you were showing it, like the T beacon, like that, I assume that was for the iOS with the Bluetooth beacon technology. Is that something like everything that we see in that list that you've got there in your toolbox, are those things that are all cross-platform implemented, or are there some things that are specific to iOS and Android and you kind of have to know?
It will tell you. If
Okay.
it's something that doesn't support the other platform, typically speaking, you'll know.
Okay.
But most of the time, if it's in here, if I hover over this.
Oh yeah.
Ah, nice.
I got it to go away. Hang on. I'll bring it back up. There we go. So
That's really cool.
You look at the list. It tells you, hey, it's good for iOS. It's good for Windows 64, 32, Android, OS X. It doesn't matter. It'll run those. So those work on all platforms.
Yeah,
But there's not like a filter that you could just say like, hey, only show me the controls that are cross-platform.
Yeah. I mean, it basically does that already. There's a lot of controls you're not seeing right now that are actually VCL controls. If it's available for the mobile application, it's typically, well, here you go, right there. So that one's only available for OS X and Android, but the BLE standard is available for all of them.
Hey, and what's really cool, because I think we sort of skipped over this when we were talking about cross-platform. We talked about the mobile platforms earlier.
Yeah.
This is true like Windows, desktop, Mac OS. and the mobile platforms, iOS, Android, and those. I mean, so I think that's worth calling out. Cool.
Yeah, one of the things that Zach's done that's really impressed a lot of our clients is as he's developing out, instead of having to have them come over or do some kind of magic to get a copy of the app over on their phone, he can just email them an exe file and they can look at the app right on their computer, make sure that it's functioning and looking the way that they want it to without ever having to touch a phone.
Nice.
Yeah, I wanted to mention too. Like, it seems like some of the tools I've used that have had some sort of limited cross-platform. Like, it feels kind of tacked on. So it's like you do all your work, and then when you're done, you go and then you try and kind of configure those deployment targets. And sometimes then you find out that you can't use something or do something. But it seems like this is all kind of like upfront, like cross-platform, like focused.
Well, that's kind of when we did some research a couple of years ago trying to figure out, because I didn't want to do native anymore because I didn't like the having to build twice. We did quite a bit of research at the time as to which cross-platform system we wanted to use. And this one was the one that really felt like these guys were pushing as their main focus to be cross-platform. And they were targeting everything that they were doing to be cross-platform.
Sorry, I'm just building this out kind of as he's going. Well, and let's face it, there's another reason why you researched what the options were. You didn't want me to hitch my wagon to that dirty old Delphi.
Well, I thought you were the last Delphi programmer left.
No, the joke never gets old. But, I mean, in all seriousness, I'm just making up names for these components at this point.
Oh, that coding blocks main. I like it. All right.
How does it work, though, if you wanted to use like specific subsystems or features on a particular environment? Like if I wanted to use Face ID, for example.
Okay. You can actually do that. And it's actually really cool that you guys bring that up because I will show you. So over here, I have my deployment targets. And I can deploy it for any of the platforms here. You can even do a Linux deployment if you want. But if I come down here, let's say, and I say libraries, I can add in additional support if I need to. So I can bring in whatever SDK library was required by the platform. So if there's an SDK library for Face ID, let's say, I can bring that in there. Now, I can tell you that Embarcadero is constantly evolving and developing and releasing add-ons to support the platforms better and more in depth. So if it's a major thing like that, I can't swear to Face ID, but if it's available for developers to have access to it, you better believe they'll probably put it in there eventually. The other critical thing is if I click this button right here, let's say, right, and double click, same thing as Visual Studio, it brings you to the on-click event. But I can come in here and I can also do this though. I can go if def and then go platform. Wait, you asked about Apple, right? iOS.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then if. Okay, so anything in between these two tags right now is going to be executed on the iOS environment. And it's going to be ignored under any other environment. So if you have something that is truly 100% got to be specific to that platform, you can put them between there. And you can actually extend the platform, the actual environment, to contain those SDKs and tags. I'm going to go ahead and just go up here, for instance. So as you use this clause, it's kind of like an includes, or we've all kind of been there. But oops. Let's see if I can. I keep doing that. You know what? If it wants to create it that bad, we'll let it. Okay. Nice. See, you guys caused me to break it.
I would think like the fear with kind of using something that's cross-platform is I'd be 9 months in and then there'd be something I'd have to do on one of those platforms that I just am flat out unable to. But it seems like that wouldn't really come up in practice that often. And it seems like even if it did, like you can make it happen either through if defs or adding additional libraries.
There we go. It's because I haven't saved the file. It keeps trying to put those in there because it knows I need them. And doesn't want me to go through and include them on accident. All right, so if I come in here and I can go to system, I can access a lot of the stuff related to system. I can do the same thing with Android directly related things. In fact, we've done that. One of the applications that we worked with, we set it up so that it would detect when the virtual keyboard was up versus not up. And this is before there was better virtual keyboard support built into RAD Studio. So what we had to do is we had to hook into the platform to tell, especially on Apple, to be able to tell when that keyboard was up and when they were done typing. So those were all platform-specific tags. So another great example of that. But yeah, you can just do your includes up here related to anything that's in that platform library.
And so in that include section, it has like all of the Apple specific ones, or are they in like some other namespace and I need to know like what the Apple namespace translates into, Embarcadero's namespace?
Yep. You can call it directly, I believe, but typically speaking, this is styling. Sorry, guys. Typically speaking, you can still call the native one. You just gotta follow the right information so it knows how to get you to where you want to go.
Did you have to wrap the native libraries in some sort of common interface so that you can use them, or do you end up with a lot of switch statements in your code for those platform specific things?
My suggestion would be, if you're going to be bringing in native stuff, is you wrap it before you start. One of the issues that Zack did run into early on was he was trying to do these switch statements all throughout the application to switch between the two types of native controls, and it made the code very ugly. So it is better to bring that native component in, wrap it with a controller, and then bring your controller in.
I'm trying to find one of the ones where they actually do this.
Okay. So that's very cool. So that's basically you can create your own extension that way.
I can tell you that you can do it. I'm not doing a very good job at finding the specific entry where they show you how to do it. And that's actually another awesome thing about Embarcadero is they have been an absolute godsend to me when it came to development. I actually started on an older version of their stuff. Technically I started clear back in like Delphi 3 days, but I actually started with an older version of RAD Studio that really wasn't supported anymore. And I continued to try to bludgeon my way through this process instead of just upgrading to what we already had a license for. So as soon as I upgraded, I'm like, oh, wow, they made a lot of changes. So I've stayed current ever since. But they still helped me. Regardless of what was going on, they bent over backwards to try to help me be able to succeed at what I was doing. And so that's an experience that I had never gotten out of any other IDE provider. So that is something that I do definitely want to state. That's one of the things that inspired me to go out and try to tell other people how great this product is. So,
was that you reaching out to them personally, or was it community forums, or what was that? I mean, because that's huge.
I literally called them.
Nice.
Well, I think there needs to be 2 points there, because the community has also been very receptive to helping you too.
Oh yeah,
cool.
I don't think that I've ever gotten flamed by the community for asking a rookie question. The usual IRC channel stuff you guys get, where it's you got a problem with your Ubuntu, and you go to the Ubuntu channel, and they basically want to sit there and call you a noob. And so you turn around and you go into the Debian channel and you try to get help. And they turn around and oh, you have Ubuntu. We can't help you. It's totally different. No.
Right.
And my all-time favorite was the Red Hat guys. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Linux, but the Red Hat guys, they were one of my favorites along the way. It was you go and you try to get support for Fedora, and they would they kind of like laugh at you or tell you something silly, or they didn't really have the answer. And then you go into the CentOS channel and you'd ask, and they when you try to explain that it's basically the same thing, they would argue about it, And then you go to the Red Hat channel and you try to ask, and same result. All 3 channels insist they're nothing like the other guy. And then Red Hat came out and said, they're all the same. We're going to support them all the same.
Right.
And
so
it upset a lot of people.
So you're basically saying you got more useful answers than RTFM, which is basically what you get.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Exactly. So,
hey, Alan, what's RTFM?
I don't
Just
remember.
kidding.
I've just
I think Sean was talking there.
Isn't there some computer law that the best way to get the answer on the internet isn't to ask the question, but to post why this technology is bad, and then you have somebody who's willing to help you? Yeah, there's a law or something like that.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I've gotten a lot of really good answers from IRC channels. But
So something I want to point out as he's going through and designing this interface, I remember doing this with Xcode, and with what he's doing in order to get the constraints set up properly, felt always very counterintuitive with Xcode, and the way he does it here in Delphi feels like the way it should have been.
There's
I noticed that it bound even when you resized. It was already anchored to the edges, which is beautiful. It seems like nobody gets that right.
Yeah, I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried Xcode, but this is trying to get all the components to lay out right and sit where they're supposed to on the screen. I feel like I spend more time doing that than I do actually writing the application.
Well, and another thing I want to point out that's kind of cool is you guys probably see me. I keep looking down. And part of what's going on right now is as I'm messing around with this application, I've got a phone here. One of the cool things that RAD Studio has is this live preview setting. And I wish I could actually share the screen with you guys. But basically, I can actually see the application as I'm designing it right here.
I'd like to point out, too, that's an iPhone.
Yes.
That's pretty sick. I mean, that's awesome.
Like what you see on the screen right there, it's like syncing between what you got.
Yeah.
Wow.
You're not even like hardwired in?
No, that one's dude. Here, here. Hold this for a second. I'll throw a style up there. They'll see what I mean. All right, so I'm going to drop a style sheet on the page just because that.
You have to make it like a very vivid color so we can see it.
Wait! But you're not wired to it right now.
No.
There's.
Could get you there. You go. All right, now I believe it.
We got the magician thing going on.
Yeah. See, no strings. All right, so I'm going to jump in here real quick, and. So this is the style sheet designer that just popped up on the screen. I'm actually going to drag that off screen here for a second because I got to get into my files. But just a second.
Hey, I do want to note that we said before we recorded that we were going to kind of hold questions to the end. We have completely derailed everything he's tried to do so far.
Well, they've been great questions.
I was going to say, I mean, it seems like you guys are kind of excited about it. So I love answering the questions.
Can you move the phone a little bit closer, please? There we go. Okay, yeah, you can see. Wow, that's cool.
Okay, hang on a second. I'm about to apply the theme. So
you're saying stuff about doing iOS development with Xcode and things. This gives you the nice bits where you drop a button, you can double click it, and you get all your events and everything. You don't have to manually wire them up. Like,
no, you don't.
That would be a great idea.
Yeah, I forgot about Xcode. The event wiring up was also not pleasant.
Yeah.
The other thing with this is, too, when I was doing Android development, I spent a lot more time in the...
Nice.
Wow, that's cool.
Sorry.
I spent a lot more time with Android instead of doing the drag and drop designer. I'm going to put this down.
Yeah.
Instead of using the drag and drop designer, I would end up spending most of my time in the XML, which you could get lost in there quickly. This drag and drop interface that Embarcadero's come up with just feels more that it's not hampering the development. You can just, this is where I need to put stuff and just go.
Yeah.
And did we already mention that no Xcode? We haven't seen any Xcode.
None.
Yep.
I'm not complaining.
All right. So what I just did there was I actually dropped a bunch of stuff into a combo box. And one of the reasons why I wanted to show that is the live previews are actually interactive. You can actually go in here and, use the combo box and actually select things and done. There we go. I'm not an iOS user, so
one of the things to point out here too is he can style this based off of any of the platforms. So he can have an iOS specific style that makes it feel like an iOS app, and then he can immediately turn around and apply an Android style that makes it feel like an Android app.
Okay, I was going to ask about that later when we were supposed to ask questions. You can follow the style guides then for the whatever platform you're on to really make it feel like a native application.
Yeah, and you're not doing any weird stuff in the background. You're just, this is the style sheet I want to use for iOS, and this is the style sheet that I want to use for Android.
That's really cool.
And with that live preview feature that you're using, can you do multiple devices at the same time? Could you have an iOS device and an Android device live previewing the app as you're developing it?
Yeah, so I've actually came in here and seen Zack have two phones and 2 tablets sitting in front of him so he can see basically across the board what that app's going to look like as he's designing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's nice.
That's really cool.
So thankful you guys for doing this, because not only is it a cool product, but I didn't even know that this was a possibility. I didn't know that you could do that. I hadn't imagined it.
Right.
Yep. You were talking there about the UI being able to be themed for different devices. Does it do some of the stuff like I think Xamarin does with moving components around to put them at the top or at the bottom, or is that something you have to do yourself?
What do you mean?
So like tabs, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So if let's say I wanted to take this whole thing and cut it over to tabs, right? So what I would do is, sorry, I ditched the tool palette over here and you guys can't see it. I typically use the tool palette at the top. You can actually choose one or the other. You don't have to have both of them on here. But what I'll do is I'll go in here if I want tab control, and I'll just type tab. Here's tab control. I'll drop that on the page. And then let's just take our stuff here. And, I think I hoovered up the tab control with it. Nope, there it is. Okay, so now the stuff's gone, and I go over here. Yeah, I did. Whatever, I'll just throw another one on there. So, sorry, it's doing this on the fly. Okay, so, second time's a charm, So I can say client on that, and then I can paste everything back in. Then I go add tab item. So now I got a tab. I got my stuff. I'm going to add another tab item. So, oops.
Yeah, and I feel like I need to point that out, that he was able to just copy and paste right back in the IDE, because I've done that with Xcode and things go very bad very quickly.
There we go. So yeah, now I've got 2 tab items in here. So yeah, you can flip flop between them. You can change which ones in what order. At the moment, they're not really. I probably picked the absolute worst theme to work with too, but but anyway, yeah. So but you're not caught up with anything. You're not stuck or unable to bind anything at that point. So
yeah, when you pasted that, or when you put the tab panel on there, you told it to use client mode, which means that I think, to answer James's question, on Android, the tabs would be wherever they are on Android. I think they're at the top, and on iOS, the tabs would be across the bottom, right?
You can actually control that.
Okay.
So let's see if I can find a great example here.
Yeah, I know on one of the apps you actually did have it working that way.
Yep, tab position, top. And see, I haven't quite bound all these. We're going to wipe these out just so you guys can see easier. All right, there
totally we go. Hijacked your demo.
No, you're fine. I want the questions. I really do. All right, so I'm going to just start clean just so it's easier, because I try to do too many things at once there. But so there's your tab item. I'm going to go ahead and add a second one. And what I can do is I can actually go in here and change it so they're at the top, or they're at the bottom, or they're dots, or they're none.
But there was platform default, which is beautiful, because if you want it to stay iOS specific or Android specific, it'll do it for you.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you'll notice I flipped themes just now, and it's at platform default right now. But I don't know if you can see on the phone there, the tabs are at the bottom because that's standard for iOS.
Nice.
And you're still seeing your iOS theme, even though I flipped. So
I kind of get the feeling that you guys have had client meetings before where the app is half done by the time you're done with the meeting.
One of the most difficult things for me to explain to a client is that I don't use wireframes. God bless their heart, they wanted me to give them wireframes so they could write a manual or something. And I was like, well, I don't really use wireframes. And I showed them. I'm like, this is why. And I brought them in here, and I had an Android device, and I had an iOS device, and I had the Windows application all running simultaneously. And I'm busy changing it. And I'm like, this is why I don't use them, because I just put these in there, and I make sure it looks right on all the devices, and I just keep going until it's done, And it's like I equate it to working with clay. It's like you're building a beautiful clay statue, and you're just kind of adjusting it as you go until you get what you want.
Well, and it affords us an opportunity where we've had a few times now where we're sitting down with a client, and we, for whatever reason, we can't get a design that either party's happy with. It just we can't get that look and feel to where it feels right when it's sitting in your hand. So we'll just bring the client in and say, okay, let's just start putting this on the phones and start seeing what it looks like, and just keep working with it for an hour or so until we get a true feel that the client is happy with.
Yep.
So in your experience in using this developer experience, what's the lag time, or is there a lag time when like Google or Apple come out with a new version of the OS with new SDKs and new features baked into that OS? Like, what's the before you can use it in the IDE, or is there a lag time?
So in the past, there has been, and it hasn't been too terribly bad. But I do know that recently it's been more of me not wanting to do the latest patch yet because I'm in the middle of something, and less them. But yeah, in the beginning, what was that?
Yeah, that's one thing to be aware of if you're using RAD Studio, is you have to be very can't think of a word. Cognizant of which version everything's on, because if your phone's a newer version than your iOS or your Mac is, then you can't run on the phone. And if your Xcode is too new of a version that Embarcadero hasn't come out with their patch yet to be able to run across that new version, then that's going to give you issues. So you got to kind of be aware of that at all times. So with your Mac and your phones, you're going to want to be, not necessarily a rev behind, but you're not going to want to update that on launch day.
Yeah.
Now, that's not specific just to cross-platform development, right? You still have those same problems with native, where if you update too quick, you're not going to have the feature set.
Well, that's another thing is too. I never would upgrade on launch day, at least with my production stuff, anyways, just because, as everyone knows, when that first launch comes out, there's always going to be little bugs and stuff that they got to correct for. And if I'm trying to get an app out there, I don't want to be dealing with that while I'm trying to get this app done too. I'm going to wait until I get that app done and then do all my updates, if at all possible.
Yeah, but in an Xcode world, though, you can't, if you wanted to use like one of the machine learning capabilities that Apple was baking into the operating system, right? Like that SDK isn't even going to be available until the next version of Xcode comes out that supports it. So you can't use it in an older version anyways.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what I would say is if you find yourself in a situation where you're trying to do something and you're having to kind of hack and slash your way through it, my experience has been that you probably need to get a hold of Embarcadero, because either you're not doing it right or it's something that they really feel like they should probably put into it. That's been my typical experience with it is anytime where I've had to really kind of start pulling in some of these bleeding edge libraries and trying to do stuff like that, which I've done stuff like that with AWS. And it was just, I found that when it's like pulling teeth, I'm doing it wrong. So,
and I think there's a point to be made there. If you're wanting to do bleeding edge development where you want to use all the newest and greatest things that Apple and Google are coming out with, this is probably not going to be right for you. You're going to want to stick with native development.
Yeah, I was going to say to be fair though, that's any cross-platform thing, right? Like whether you're doing RAD Studio whether you're doing Xamarin or Cordova or Corona, I should say, any of those, right? They're never going to be completely up to date with that kind of stuff because they can't be.
Yeah, they have to wait until we get it before they can develop their interface to it.
Right.
Another thing I wanted to point out here. Did you guys see this preview panel I have on the side?
Yeah. Can you move it a little to the left?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, right there. So similar to the whole live preview thing we talked about, that multi-device preview allows me to see what this is going to look like as I'm working with it.
That's nice.
So if I wanted to take that button out, let's say. See? And so now I can kind of get a look and feel without having to have 20 devices on my desk.
And how did you decide the devices that you were going to – there was the screen that you showed early on the left where it had like the various –
Yeah, so what happened there was I used this drop-down right here, and every one of the items that I touched on in that drop-down are now over here.
Ah.
So,
how does it pick the iOS version or the Android version of the OS?
That's controlled by the platform manager. Where's that? I think I closed it.
If you wanted to target a specific version of Android or a specific version of iOS.
Yep, you can actually do that.
I noticed that we haven't talked a lot about Windows Phone yet. I don't know if
whatever, man.
Oh, wait, sorry.
When I started this, Windows Phone was an option.
Yeah,
So that's quietly went away.
I feel like we have a troll on the call.
So in here, do you see where it states the targeted SDK platform?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I can do that right there. I can change the SDK. You can put multiple targets in here. It's like if I wanted to add a different platform to work with, all I would do is actually go back in here. I would just click add, and I would select which platform I'm adding, and I would give it the path to the SDKs and work from there.
Very nice.
If you want, going back to kind of like the specifics of a particular operating system, like if you wanted to use some of the, like Apple just had the WWDC keynote, last week? What was it? Or the week before?
I think it was last week.
You know, there were a lot of the talks where they talked about Metal, for example. So if you wanted to take advantage of the capabilities of Metal inside of this app, and at least for the iOS specific part of the app, you wanted to take advantage of Metal, could you do that? And how would you do that? Or does this go back to like that other screen you showed us where it's like, oh, you just add in the library that you want?
All right, so it's really cool that you actually brought that up, because one of the other things that's really, really neat about these applications is they shift the load of even the, like a standard application. They shift the load of the application between the processor and the GPU on the phone. So if you've got an application that's even a line of business application that's really, really process intensive, it will actually split some of that processing off on the GPU, which allows you to really do, some really neat things that are higher processing requirements that you couldn't normally do without having to write effectively your own driver.
So I was going to ask about that. So correct me if I'm wrong here, but with native iOS, you generally have to worry about a UI thread and some type of work thread, right? And so you don't have to worry about that when you're doing this, is what you're telling me?
I'm not going to say you don't have to worry about that. That was one of the stumbling blocks of mobile development that I was not used to. I was used to being able to execute things in the main thread, and I would only split to a different thread if I had to, kind of thing. But no, and actually a lot of the components, this gives me a great chance to touch on another component really quick. This component right here is their REST interface stuff. So they have these REST components that allow you to interact with any REST service. And the cool thing about them is that they are able to bring them into data-aware components. So if you're doing a platform with just your standard, your line of business application where you've got some data grids, you got some data entry going on, you can actually bring them in here as if they were, SQL data connections almost. And you can bring that REST interface in, you can make your changes, you can push those changes back up via the REST interface, and it's all done primarily with these almost like drag and drop components. The reason why I bring up the REST client, though, is let me grab the REST request here. Do you see this after execute? The after execute command allows me to basically say, you're going to execute this in its own thread. And so when I execute it, it doesn't lock the OS up, so you can transfer larger amounts of data that way.
Okay, so you still need to be aware that there's native features that are different than web application that you have to deal with.
Yep.
And
Okay.
I think there's that's one of the pitfalls that I ran into early on with native development, and he ran into it when he was switched over to RAD Studio, is you got to get out of that main thread as quickly as possible, because especially iOS, if you lock up that main thread, it will kill your app very, very quickly. So you got to be very aware of what thread you're in and that you're not working in that main thread, or things go bad in a hurry.
Okay, so I don't want to rush you guys, but we are cutting close on time to what we said. So I want to try and put a pause in the questions for right now and make sure that you guys show everything that you want to show.
Yep. Actually, there's really only like maybe one or two spots I want to touch on at this point.
Perfect.
Firedeck is another critical thing that you guys should know about. What Firedeck does is it is a data access component that allows you to interface the platform with multiple other things. So I don't really want to use this example, but envision almost like an ODBC of ODBC. I can pipe the stuff from the REST interface into the Firedeck components, and that's what makes them data aware. So as a result, I can take like this Firedeck connection right here, and I can drop a table or something on there that will allow, hang on, there we go. Table adapter, mem table. Here we go. So I dropped this table on here right now, and part of the table's data set is if it's a SQLite, an SQLite table, or if it's an interbase table, I can interface with it quite easily, and they just quickly interact with each other and go from there.
So if I remember right, when you were originally doing this, you were able to bring in a JSON HTTP request, pipe it through Firedeck, and be able to show it as a list view right on the page with very minimal coding.
Correct. Actually, another cool thing that they provide is they provide this REST debugger here. So this thing's really cool, and actually, I don't know, I might have one of my clients' things in here still. I do.
So it's like Postman.
Mm-hmm.
Little bit, and I don't know if this will go through because it was just intended as a test. Oh, it does. Okay, so what that did was it allowed me to test my parameters, my authentication, my everything. Okay, and when I sent out that request, it retrieved JSON, which I can see right here, and then it shows me what the table would look like based on the information that I provided, based on the configuration. Now, the other really cool thing about it, if I hit copy components right here, and then I'm going to go ahead and delete these out of here, and I paste, it just dropped all the components on the page to make that REST connection work from now on.
That's pretty sweet.
So now I can right click, I can execute this. Yep, it came over successfully. I don't have any place for it to go right now, so not a big deal. But that's basically the gist of it, though. So now I can set everything up from here. So yeah, while we're touching on this, I mentioned Interbase. It's kind of a neat thing. There's only 2 databases at the moment that are approved by Apple for usage on the iOS platform, and that's SQLite and it is Interbase. And Interbase is HIPAA compliant. It's actually capable of encrypting the data set. Idera actually owns Interbase. They own Sencha. They own, obviously, Embarcadero and RAD Studio. They develop all kinds of other DB tools and optimizers. Actually, we stumbled into one of their tools trying to synchronize 2 databases, and it was almost too much of a tool for us because it was more than what we needed. But it was a very, very complete set of tools, and that's one of the things that's really, really cool about being able to work with Embarcadero and having that connection. So. I think that was the only other thing I really wanted to touch on. I probably should briefly mention the indie components here. If you're doing something that's really, really communications based and you really want to go to that level, indie components have been around for a long time, but I'll just quickly explain them. You have a series of internet-based components like TCP, UDP, TCP commands, broadcasts, ping, ICMP, same thing, Telnet, POP3, all these components. Like here's an IRC component. So if I wanted to build an IRC app, all I have to do is click on that and drop it on the page typically. Ooh, I got to delete that bad component.
I kind of just want to click those things and drag them in and play around and see what happens. Kind of reminds me of the early days of learning to program.
These have been around actually since I first started learning how to program in Delphi, and I can tell you that I have actually wrote clients and servers for every single one of these, and they actually have a set of servers too. So if you wanted to come in here and throw up an IMAP server, you can create an IMAP server with this. You can also do your tunnels and on the fly stream handling and compression intercepts. That's actually what these are. You can do some really cool stuff.
So stream handling, like if we were going to create your own video player, it would translate that video player to, Android or iOS.
Think more raw level. When we're talking about stream handling, I'm talking more of a kind of like if I wanted to write my own network client for doing Samba or something.
You're talking like a network stream and
network sockets, that kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that is exactly what I'm talking about. Network sockets, yes.
Okay.
And they make it really, really easy. Just really quick. If I want to drop this, they got a POP3 one in here. Right here, POP3. So I really needed to delete that. I forgot about it. But you have your auto login, and you just populate the properties, and you can do it in the code, or you can do it right here. I don't recommend doing it here. Obviously, if somebody reverse engineers your program, they'll get your password. So obviously, always do it programmatically. But you come in here, and you have different events that can be handled. And anytime I want to interact with that, I can. So yeah, I'm going to have to delete that.
How difficult is it to bring in third-party libraries?
I'll be honest with you. I'll get back to you on that. I haven't needed any yet. We're going to be doing one soon for who was it? It was some test deployment platform.
Oh, TestFairy.
Yeah, we're going to be doing one to integrate them. I haven't typically needed them only because the level of completion of the component packages that I've already been provided.
There's a couple companies out there that are making additional component packages, kind of like Telric for Visual Studio. There is a couple other companies out there making component packs that you can just add right into RAD Studio to extend the functionality as well. I think the setup you have doesn't have any of those installed currently, right? I think you stripped those off, right?
Which ones?
The pack that we were going to grab.
Oh yeah, no, that doesn't have it.
Okay, I didn't know. Yeah.
There's AWS access is actually available for this too. So if I go up here, this is probably more relevant to you guys. If I want to integrate with Azure, I can just click this and start working with Azure or Amazon.
Awesome.
Nice.
So I know Sean's about to kick us real along.
I'm sorry, guys. It's just
I'm sold. I love it. I bid on the sales pitch, hook, line, and sinker. My next question is, what's this going to cost me?
Okay, well, that's kind of where the metal meets the meat. The bottom line on cost, typically speaking, last I knew, and I'm going to just go ahead and really quick look here so I don't tell you guys the wrong thing.
Yeah, I've got the page pulled up.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
So something to note. RAD Studio typically includes both C++ Builder and Delphi. If you want to go one platform or the other, you could actually cut some of that expense. But, oh man, there's a whole other thing I forgot to tell you guys about. We'll get to that in a minute. Sorry. But yeah, so if I wanted to go to just Delphi, last I knew, what was it? I think it was 14 for original. Here, they used to list the prices on the website. Here, I got it right here. So I went to RAD Studio, and the professional version of RAD Studio is $2,200. I know that if you catch them when they're doing their gear up sales, you can get lower pricing. The other thing that I should note is the amount of time that it saves you with not having to redesign the application is typically worth it. What I wouldn't use this for is if you're just building a little hobby asteroids game or something like that.
Another piece to note with this too is there is a yearly renewal fee for RAD Studio, so you have to, and you're going to want to keep up on that because Embarcadero is always releasing new things, always improving that product, and you're going to need that renewal license so that when Xcode and Google come out with new features or change the upload process to them, that you can get those updates, or else you'll be at a point where you can't compile anymore.
Yeah, I mean that's. I mean, they don't disable. I gotta clarify that. They don't disable your compiler. What'll happen is you won't be able to push to the mobile platforms because you won't be compliant. In particular, Apple. That's the place where you really get burned.
Yeah.
But
now, if you sign up for the contest here, you're going to get a 9-month trial, which is enough to do like 200 apps based on what I've seen.
Yeah. I'm going to have
So don't worry
4
about
different asteroid apps.
Right.
One per day. So just as a quick heads up, though, like the Firedeck thing that you're showing us, like the abstracted data storage,
yeah,
that is on the enterprise level. So,
yep,
the professional's not going to get you that, but
How much is that, like 4K?
yeah. On sale, it's cheaper. On sale right now, it's $3,500.
But I'd like to point out, if knowing what I know, you could get away without using Firedeck, but for the cost, you might as well get it. I mean, you're going to save yourself that much in time alone.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Is this is not for a hobbyist. This is for somebody that's looking to do serious application development that is in it professionally. If you're professionally developing applications, if you develop more than one application in a year, it will pay for itself easy. And I can tell you that the multi-term, like when you buy your seat and you say, all right, well, I want my licensing to be 2 years or 1 year or 3 years, the more you purchase up front, the far cheaper that it gets.
Well, and I'd like to note, too, that our company's seen enough value in RAD Studio that we went ahead and, after our first year was over, we went to a 3-year license because I didn't want to deal with negotiating again, and I knew that I was going to need this product for at least the next 3 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Visual Studio right now. It's $3,000 for the enterprise per year.
Yep.
$500 per pro per year, and that's not a cheaper renewal. That's just it every year.
Well, and I can tell you that it's not. You don't pay that large license fee every year. It's not $3,500 a year with RAD Studio, and I definitely encourage you to talk to your sales reps. Form a relationship with them because they can help you, especially if you keep them in the know as to what you're doing. So,
we'll have a link for the website where they can go to find all this information and get in touch with a sales rep. Correct?
Yes, and actually, I strongly recommend that they use your link to do that. Those people are waiting for your people to go through there.
Awesome.
But there's not a community or developer edition, though, right? Long story short, regarding the pricing.
There used to be, and I don't know if they still got a starter edition that can be used.
But I don't think that's got we looked that before, that doesn't have the.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be a reduced one.
No, it doesn't have the mobile.
No DAC for sure.
Oh yeah.
I think when we asked them about that before, and that doesn't have the mobile stuff. That's pure Delphi.
But the cool thing is they don't have to redevelop it.
Yeah.
So get it working, and then no.
Yeah. I would strongly recommend taking advantage of the 9-month keys.
Yeah, that's really going to let you know if this is the right product for you, because this is not, like Zach said, this is not going to be for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of use cases where I would still go native, but
does this just run on Windows, or can you run this on? Can you run RAD Studio on Mac as well?
I'm ill-equipped to answer that.
I don't know either.
Okay, just curious.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I haven't. I really haven't been paying attention to that, actually.
So it's not dog-fooded like a Visual Studio.
Yeah.
Visual Studio is written in .NET.
I think that check with them. I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. It's really important for me not to accidentally tell you the wrong thing. Another thing I actually want to point out, guys, this is another cool thing that they've done, and I really did want to touch on it. I completely forgot to touch on it while we were doing the thing. But they've got these connectors right here that allow you to quickly and easily connect between your RAD Studio application and all of these other services. And that is, it's a pretty bleeding edge thing. I can tell you I do a lot of data exporting, migrating data from older legacy systems over to stuff like Microsoft SQL and things like that. So having connectors like this for integrations is phenomenal. And it's not just these. There's just so many connectors that they have, and they're still going. They're still developing more and more connectors. So
you mentioned asteroids a minute ago, and it made me question, like, what kind of application is this thing really geared towards, do you think? Is this more for the person or team writing the line of business mobile app, or would it also work well for game development, for example?
I do know
our experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I do know people that are doing game development with it. Based on my limited experience messing around with 3D inside RAD Studio, I would have to probably lean toward, if you're going to do serious game development. I'm not talking Flappy Bird. I'm talking doing
Fortnite.
I'm talking doing some heavier end stuff. I would strongly recommend using an engine that's dedicated to that and getting hooked up with a community that's part of that engine. One offhand that I do know, and I know we probably are going to mention it at some point here, so I'll just toss it out there, Unity 3D. I've got experience, a couple years worth of experience developing games in Unity 3D. And I would probably, for familiarity's sake, reach to Unity every time for game development. But that doesn't mean that my opinion on that wouldn't change if I actively developed a game app with this. But from what I've seen, for simplicity's sake, one of the things Unity has over the top of it for game development is that asset library and a lot of pre-canned, pre-built things that are angled toward actual game development. Now, if you told me you wanted to do a simulation of some sort of particle collision or something on a tablet, I would recommend using RAD Studio for that, because you're not using the mechanics that are going to be built into Unity anyway. You're going to be developing your own set of mechanics to begin with.
But if I'm a developer looking at this, what I'm really looking to do is line of business applications. This is something where I have forms, I have just data that I need to get in and out, and I need a quick way of being able to do that, quick way to be able to deploy. I'm not going to be doing any crazy fancy things. This is just going to be get data in, get data out, get reports, get the information quickly to the clients, and something that I can update and change quickly without a lot of development time.
Yep. The other, I think, critical thing to note is you have access to the source code, and that is a huge thing. Having full control of the source code for a lot of things. The source code I'm referring to is things like I can dive into the components and actually see how each and every one of them is built, and I can debug them, troubleshoot them. If I find something that's not compliant with the operating system, I can see that right away. And see, like, I just dove into their REST component right here, and here it is. I mean, I can tear down that REST framework. So it allows me to see some things. Now, I can tell you that the few times that I thought I knew better than them, I was doing it wrong. So they do put a lot of thought into here. So
speaking of source code and components, are you guys concerned using Delphi at all? I know that tends to be an older language. Is that something that you're worried about, using an older language, not having people around to support that?
I'm not. I mean, he can answer the question.
So I think it goes back to how it's written. the first couple of apps that Zack wrote, I was nervous about because I couldn't follow through the code. I'm not a Delphi developer myself. As he's gotten better with it and as he's cleaned up the code, I can walk into one of his apps right now as a non-Delphi developer. I can do a code review for his code and understand what he's doing because it's Delphi, but it's got its roots in C. It's got its roots in VB.NET. So it's still got that same flow to it and that same feel to it that I can still quickly navigate myself around in the IDE.
Here's a shameless plug on that, though. Thank you, Uncle Bob. I'm serious. His ability to read my code is directly correlated to my choice to embrace clean code. And that changed. I mean, you see how that's affected, though. I mean, I'm able to develop in this platform because of the fact that I embraced more of a clean code base. So he's not afraid of having to maintain that code. As for the age of the platform, I think that's something that does need to be addressed. It's something that came up in chat. Having an old platform is not a bad thing. We're saying old platform like it's old, not used anymore, and that's not true. It's used by 90 of the 400 companies at this point. It is used primarily and predominantly by large enterprise organizations, government agencies, healthcare. It's used heavily on an international scale. It's one of the I'm not going to call it a mistake, so to speak. One of the business strategies that was used by Borland back in the day, when Borland had full control over this, was they would go to the colleges and they would set the colleges up to be able to teach Pascal using Delphi. And so they were indoctrinating generation after generation of Delphi coder. What happened was Anders, the guy who actually wrote Delphi, was recruited by Microsoft for a gazillion dollars. It was actually a lot of money back then. But he was recruited to write C#. And so then Microsoft dumped a ton of money into going to these colleges and selling all these this next generation on using Visual Studio, on using C# and VB and using those technologies where it basically eclipsed, and there was a lot of myths that came out during that time period about how Delphi is a dead language and Delphi is only used for educational purposes. And this actually gives me a great chance to tell you, do you know where the furthest deployment of a Delphi application is?
Mars.
Voyager? I don't know.
Jupiter.
Mars. It literally is Mars. The Mars rover uses a Delphi deployment or a application written in Delphi.
In RAD Studio?
Probably not RAD Studio. I'm going to guess it was probably more like Delphi 7 or something like that, or C Builder or something like that. But it was Borland's product that allowed that to happen. There are so many large companies. Par Springer. I don't know if you guys know who that is. They make hotel hospitality stuff. It's a large organization. Those platforms are written in Delphi. There's just so many different people that are using it. So that's one of those things where you don't realize who uses it. Any of you guys do anything with music?
On occasion.
Poorly.
Okay, you guys know
Not well. Terrible things to that guitar there.
So you guys know what Fruit Loops is?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, written in Delphi.
Okay, that's an awesome app.
And if none of that sells you on Delphi, you don't have to use Delphi. Use C++.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, C++ is pretty old too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is I find it amusing that people are always like, "Oh, wow, that's an old language."
But the key is, though, like
Still active.
The takeaway here is not that it's an old language, right? Like a lot of things are old languages, but they're still used, right? Like I think when a lot of people hear Delphi, they're like, "Oh, you're supporting a 20-year-old app written in Delphi, right?"
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is is people are writing new stuff with this, right? Like, it's not like you're just supporting something that's 15 years old. You know, people are creating, like in RAD Studio, obviously people are creating new applications that are being used in business, right? As opposed to, oh God, we have this thing that, you know, you have to have a Windows, you know, 98 machine somewhere with
somewhere living. Yep.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I'm actually using Delphi to port AS400 data off of AS400 systems for cities because they're, you know, they need to get the legacy data away. And so because it's got that, the roots are so deep, I'm able to work with these older platforms and bring them to the newer platform.
Because it's been evolving over time. It's not
Yeah.
a stagnant thing that's just been sitting around.
Well, let's not forget, C# really isn't a spring chicken either.
No, it's not.
I mean, come on. I mean, that's they have a similar age and lineage. I mean, it's very, very neat to see how both platforms evolved. I will say, I do feel that a ball was dropped. They didn't adopt .NET as fast as they probably should have. They were the first company, first non-Microsoft product to try to adopt .NET from an IDE standpoint. And the part of the problem was there just wasn't the documentation and the resource yet. It was very difficult for them to try to do that, and it fell short. And you know, a lot of people, they stayed on their older versions of Delphi rather than upgrade to the .NET stuff. I was one of them, actually. I resisted transitioning. The other thing is, I, like many other Delphi developers, I won't lie, we were a little short-sighted. We didn't see .NET hanging around. It's another Microsoft thing. Everybody remembers the Zune. But I mean, how many times did Microsoft do stuff like that, where they tried to force this policy change in the industry? And so it was. I mean, it happens. But you know, Embarcadero came along, and because of those roots of trying to be native and remain native, it gave them benefits.
Hey, I got one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Who do I have to bribe to get you guys on Cynical Developer Show? So I want to hear more about all this, and while I'm driving the car and walking the dog.
Yeah.
I'll send an email. I'll see what I can put together.
All right.
Yeah,
I think
I know the guy. I know the guy. I'll reach out to him.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think
So
that's really kind of the end of the honking of the Delphi horn. I mean, I'm a huge fan. I went through I have a deployment that we've done for hospitals, specifically surgical staff over in Africa. And the first time I wrote that application, we mentioned this earlier, he kept harassing me. It was the first mobile development app I'd ever done, and I kept telling him, "Oh no, penmanship or progress. I'm going to power through this. I got this. It's Delphi code. I've done Delphi code before." I learned some important lessons through that process, and I learned not to use the words penmanship or progress, and it might cause me to get fed my shoe or something at some point if I ever use it. But
well, I think there's an important part here too. Is just because somebody knew Delphi, there's a lot of mobile specific things that I kept on warning him, this is going to catch you, either from locking up the main thread, the databasing, the if you lose internet connection. These are all things that I had to fight through when I first started doing native development. So there is a lot of mobile specific things that if you're not a mobile developer, that you need to make yourself aware of before going down this road.
And that's true of any platform, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean,
well, I had the same problems in native, so it doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah, I mean, and I can't speak for the rest of the platforms out there, but another critical thing that did come up along the way is most of the issues I had with developing that application were related to the large quantities of data that were being synchronized to the device and the effect that was having on the device. I mean, you were talking about, what did we figure last estimate, 73,000 records or something like that?
Yeah, several gigs.
Yeah, and we had to be able to move them before the device timeout. And you also had this obligation to move them before the person timeout. where the person said, I'm done with this, and just walked away. So I did get that down, though. I mean, I'm able to synchronize all of those records in an obnoxiously fast amount of time now. So,
but I think before you jump into RAD Studio, you really have to sit down and do your homework on specific mobile app development in RAD Studio, because I know that shortcutted a lot of the problems that you're having, because I could specifically tell you with RAD Studio how to get around some of these mobile specific issues that you would just beat your head against the wall for hours on end if you didn't have that information.
So real quick question. Do you guys, like, I don't think we covered this before the show, but do you guys have any set of links or anything like best practices or anything like that we could include in the notes for this that might help people out who want to get started on this?
For RAD Studio?
For RAD Studio, for like mobile specific type problems like what you're talking about, that you know, these are the things that you should be aware of. Here's some good practices and you know, things to help you along the way.
Well, I'm ashamed to admit this, but when it came to the actual mobile development piece, not the Delphi best practices, but the mobile development piece.
If I need a mobile cross-platform or either one app, I know which guys to talk to. So you guys do kind of client-type work, or like you guys, you know, if someone watching this video needed a cross-platform app, needed it on fast, like even faster than RAD Studio, we can get them.
Well, and that is a really cool thing because at this point, I mean, I've done so many things. At this point, we've even been using this, using RAD Studio for one of our large multi-billion-dollar clients. I mean, so it's not even a question anymore. As we do things, where it's kind of become more of a de facto. Yeah, we're using RAD Studio, but yeah, we definitely take on clients. I can tell you that if you guys would like, you know, assistance writing a mobile application, and you know, obviously this is not a sales pitch, but call them, and you know, they I pretty much work exclusively through them. I spend quite a bit of my time traveling and, you know, going overseas, as just some of you guys know. So he's the point of contact. So
awesome.
Give him a call, and we can get you guys a quote and help you on your way.
Is there a RAD Studio channel in Coding Blocks yet?
Yes.
Yes. And somebody's on there quite often, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I man that thing constantly. So awesome. That is my domain, mine and Delphi Jedi's.
That's awesome.
Actually, I'm kind of sad. I thought he was going to join us tonight.
Yeah, I may have failed to follow through with him. So we're gonna have to re-record, guys. I'm sorry. He's gonna be here in 5, so let's from the top.
The other cool thing is there's tons of books about Delphi. It's one of those advantages you have because it's the grandpa of programming language.
Wait, you mean the books that are still on the shelf at the store? Dust on them, those?
I'm going to tell Marco Cantu on you. Actually, a cool thing, Marco Cantu writes most of the Delphi books, or at least did. I don't know if he still does, but he actually works with Embarcadero. And so you have kind of like an inside line. The other thing is, if you go to Embarcadero's site and you go to the community section, a lot of their guys inside are actually doing videos on how to do the things you want to do. There was Jim McKeith is actually one of the better ones out there that I've seen so far, although I haven't had a chance to follow all of them yet. But he shows you how to make a camera app in 5 minutes. I mean, it's an amazing thing. In fact, that's actually where I learned the live preview stuff, which has been so handy. So yeah, I mean, there's resources online. There's community forums. RAD Studio doesn't charge for people to sign up for the community forums, so you can hop in there and create an account and see what people are saying about it. And you know, I like to do that when I'm checking out new products I'm thinking about working with, because
sure, you definitely want to try and understand the community around it, right?
Well, I want to see if I mesh well with the community. I also want to see what the top 10 issues are that keep coming up. You know, and
sure.
It's so yeah, they've got there's just a lot of resources. So you asked me, and I'm over here going, I didn't learn, just so you're aware, I didn't learn Delphi in school.
Sure.
I learned that myself. I'm all self-taught on Delphi, and it was easy enough for me to pick up. So it's just
so.
Good.
So I hate to cut us off, but we're running close on at least my attention span. So I think we'll definitely make sure to include some of those resources in the notes. And if anyone has questions, they can comment on this video as well, or get into the Coding Blocks Slack and find you there. And with that, I'm going to cue it up for the outro.
Hey, Contest Alert. If you fill out the SurveyMonkey form below, not only will you get a 9-month trial for RAD Studio, but you'll also be entered into a contest to win one of 4 packages that include an Embarcadero t-shirt and a $100 gift card. So scroll down a little bit and fill that form out before you forget.
Hey, and a huge thanks to everybody here. Real big thanks to Ted and Zach for coming on and sharing this with us. And, James, Sean, you guys, as always, appreciate it. So
You guys want to give a quick where you can be found on the internet? Start with
Sure.
Ted and Zach.
You can get a hold of Ted and by proxy me, either obviously in the Coding Block Slack, or you can go to ts-mi.com and get a hold of us.
James?
Yeah, you can find me at cynicaldeveloper.com on every podcast app that's out there, including the Coding Blocks podcast app that's coming along, and again in the Slack channel for Coding Blocks.
Cool. And Sean?
Slack channel for Coding Blocks, definitely. And I have a Twitter handle. It's at Sean's handle. It's a really terrible handle, really. So you do the @ symbol, and then you type AT, and it's at Sean's handle.
Oh, so at Sean's handle.
Is it a Star Wars reference?
It's the @ symbol, and then the recursion issue.
Awesome.
So the only other thing I have to say is you guys are developing a Coding Blocks app?